everyone. Welcome to today's planter session, Church Planting Reefs, Sex, Money, Power, and the Importance of Gospel-Centered Coaching, brought to you by Geneva Push. My name is Ben McKecken. I'm going to be your moderator today. Now, throughout the webinar, we encourage you to interact with our speakers. You can do that by typing in questions using the questions pane on your GoToWebinar control panel. We're going to be answering those questions live straight after the initial interview, so make sure you get your questions in early. Also, we're recording today's webinar, and we're going to make the link to the video available within 24 hours, and we'll let you know via email. Now, before we get things underway, we'd really like to thank our supporters who make these webinars possible. Christian Super, they're one of the driving forces behind Geneva Push's planter sessions. Now, if you haven't arranged superannuation for your church plant yet, we'd strongly recommend you start with a chat to Christian Super. Their employee care team can set you up to pay super contributions for your staff online. It's quick, it's easy, and best of all, it's super that's invested biblically in line with your Christian values. For more, go to christiansuper.com.au. Now, also making things happen with the planter sessions are the team at EA Insurance. If you haven't sorted out the insurance side of church planting yet, then we'd recommend you start with a chat with EA. EA can help you sort out everything from public liability to building, property and contents insurance, as well as yet let you know about the issues you haven't even thought of yet. Go to ea.org.au. Okay, now let's get on to our host. Our host today is Executive Director of Geneva Push, Scott Sanders. Scott Sanders, I'm about to hand over to you so you can introduce us to our guest and get this conversation started. Over to you, Scott.
Thanks, Ben. It's great to be here at the first of our planter sessions for 2015. And it's a great topic that we're thinking about today, church planting reefs. It's something that we don't often like to talk about, failure or the things that are going to undo you in a church plant and the reasons for them. And I think it's a really important topic as we kick off the year, especially with a number of church plants launching. But it's important to consider sometimes the reality of church planting and speak about some of the issues that often don't get talked about. We often only hear the good news stories, and I think amidst the reefs today, we are going to get the good news as well. So let me introduce Craig Tucker. Craig Tucker.
Hey, Scott.
How you going? Let me tell everyone a bit about Craig Tucker. Craig Tucker became a Christian as a science undergraduate, and after a couple of years working in what is now called IT, Craig and his wife Kathy both trained at Moore College, trained at the New South Wales Presbyterian Theological Centre, now known as Christ College, before becoming a Presbyterian minister in 1990. Craig and Kathy served as students in a church plant at Mount Druitt before college and during college, and on completion of their training they planted a church in the west of Sydney, Blacktown West Presbyterian Church. They were there for 11 years and then they moved after that to plant a new church in the inner west of Sydney, Drummoyne Presbyterian Church. Now Craig has been trained as a church planting coach by City to City. He's been trained as a church planting assessor by the Presbyterian Church of America. And he's currently about to embark on a PhD. So it brings with him years of experience, practical, working alongside planters and also planting himself. So it's great to have Craig here this morning.
Hey, Scott. Thanks. It's good to be here. I feel very old just listening to that long introduction.
Well, age brings with it wisdom and experience. So can you tell us a little bit about your ministry experience, and I'm particularly want to hear about your church planting experience.
Yeah, okay, thanks for that. Look, I think if I look back on it, if I'm honest, I've probably been involved, apart from my student placement in Mount Druitt, where I was a student observing someone else church planting, and that was really interesting. I guess I've been involved almost in 3 church plants. Before I went to college, I was involved in a church plant thing on the Northern Beaches, and then Blacktown, and then Drummoyne. Do you want me to talk about each of those?
Yeah, that'd be great.
Great, okay. Look, on the Northern Beaches, when I say it's kind of a church plant thing, looking back on it, what happened was I was involved in a Bible study group that kind of went off the grid and got disconnected from the church it was at, and eventually became a house church, and we called it that. got to about 35 people. I guess it was kind of a church plant because we didn't set out to start a church. Though if I'd had a bit more wisdom and experience at the time, I would have probably worked out where it was going to go. And look, as I look back on that, I think of all the things that were, I'm not just wrong about how we went about things, but also why I was motivated to do it. You talk about church plants failing, and I think often we think that they fail because no one turns up or you don't make budget, but I look back on it and think it was a fail because I think it was all about my ego. It was about being in a church where the minister didn't preach the way I wanted him to. I just read Gospel and Kingdom by Graham Goldsworthy, and I wasn't sure that anyone who didn't sort of preach with a good biblical theology was going to be in heaven. And so I was part of a small group of young guys who became very critical of the minister, critical of things. We started our own little Bible study group and eventually did our own quite separatist thing. And so while we saw people become Christians through it, people really grow, people are now in full-time ministry and mission service for that house church. In another way, it was actually, for me personally, I look back on that and think of that as a fail in how I went about that. I guess I went to college because I started to realise the other thing that was going on was I was totally ill-equipped theologically to lead it. But you can get by with a teaspoon of theology for a year or two, and then after that you realise there's not much left in the sponge. And so I really went to college realising how much I needed to be more deeply equipped in the Bible and shaped by the Bible myself. I was going to think well about how to be a leader and how to make a difference for God's kingdom. Move on to Blacktown. Am I going too slow, too fast, Scott? That's all right. I went to college, not sure what I'd do. I ended up leaving Moore College, having connected with the Presbyterians and being kind of catapulted out to church plant in the Blacktown area. So I think people can see a picture of me now. That's Kathy and I when that's 1990 when we went out to Blacktown. That was the house that we met in. And that photo's funny if you know what we look like now, okay? We went there. We were basically given a new housing estate. Yeah, that's kind of what I look like now, except I'm not quite that grumpy all the time. We were basically given a postcode. There was nothing much there, and asked to church plant. We were given a core group, and I think that was actually a challenge because the core group was selected by a mother church at Layla Park and by the leaders there who they were doing the best they could while they waited for someone to come along to church plant, and they sort of formed the launch team. But that created some real challenges for us because the launch team already had a bit of culture that wasn't necessarily the same as the culture that we had and the ministry philosophy we had. They'd already, in the absence of having a planter, developed very clear leaders, and so it was difficult to come in and be the leader of that group. And a number of things were really kind of quite difficult about the way that got set up. But God was really good to us nonetheless, and we were there for 11 years. We met in our lounge room in that house you just saw. We went to a small school hall to a bigger school hall. We saw lots of people, come to know Jesus. Lots of ups and downs in griefs and joys in people's lives. But we had a great 11 years there. We passed the baton on and moved on from there. And that church is still, it's now had another pastor and now another pastor since then. And we came to Blacktown. Yep.
Yeah. So Craig, I'm wondering, did you feel equipped, as you were moving to Blacktown? Did you feel like the 3 years at college or 4 years at PTC, were you feeling far more equipped, at the start of that as opposed to the house church at the Northern Beaches?
Yeah. Okay. Yeah. Look, in some ways, theological college had really equipped me well, because the big thing it had given me was just a good grasp of the Bible, a good general theology, so that when we sat down with a blank piece of paper and said, well, how are we going to reach people for Jesus in this area? What will church look like? What will we do in terms of evangelism? What are the things that are really important to keep as key priorities in planning a church? It was great to be able to go back to the Bible and think clearly about those kind of things, and we did that a lot with our launch team. We worked our way through 1 Thessalonians, and we took 4 months to do that, thinking about pulling in other bits of the Bible, thinking about that too. In many ways, I think the best preparation for being a church planner, absolutely essential part of preparation, is to have a good grasp of the Bible, have some tools in reading and understanding the Bible, have a good theological framework behind you. In other ways, we were really ill-equipped. We'd been married a year and a half, and we're still working out how to be married. Although we'd done a year and a half in Mount Druitt as a student in a church plant, I think we really didn't understand the area we were moving to, but I think I thought I did.
Yep.
And there was, no one had really written the books on church planning back then. So I think I had Eddie Gibbs' I Believe in Church Growth, and that was about the only book on my bookshelf that resembled a church planning book at that stage. And there are just so many more resources and so much more material out there now that we were just fumbling around the dark, bumping into the furniture a lot of the time, making a lot of, I think, rookie errors that guys who've done a little bit of reading, a little bit of thinking about church planning, and would have a coach would probably avoid a lot of those kind of mistakes.
Yep. So you spoke about the conflict amongst the core team, and that was to do with already, I guess, having an established idea of where they were going, already being established as leaders, and a team who had obviously thought about, here's what we're for. You open up the Bible with them. You obviously work through your vision for the plant and tried to get them on board. How did you deal with the conflict? How did you deal with it as newly married to Kathy? Moving to a new area. How did you feel? Were you feeling isolated, lonely? And I guess what was your solution? To both those things.
No, thanks for that. I think the first thing was that having the setup we went to meant that things moved slower, and that was the big thing. It took longer to get to all the milestones we needed to get to, particularly to launch. And even we launched still with some things not clarified and really not being on the same page necessarily as a team on some things we should have been. There was some conflict with that. There was definitely a lot of loneliness with that. We in the end had some great friends in that church and even in that launch team, but we didn't necessarily. They were connected with each other, but we didn't necessarily have a connection with them. One of the things that was really helpful for me, I didn't have a coach, and I really wish I had, but the thing that really, I think, helped us survive was I connected up with two guys I went through college with, Ray Dallaire and Steve Gooch, and one or two other guys came and went in that kind of group, and we were the core of a group that met for 10 years, every fortnight. There we are. I don't know what the hats are about. Must have been someone's birthday, but it's in our kitchen. But we, the guys met fortnightly to pray. We particularly wanted to work on our preaching, and I think preaching clearly, preaching in a way that's helpful to people, preaching faithfully, has to be part of a church plant, or you're really probably growing something that's not really worth growing. We really wanted to work on our preaching together, and so every fortnight we'd meet, we'd play the tape on one of our talks, and that's right, we actually did have a cassette tape back then. We'd roll the tape on a talk. The other two guys would give feedback on that. We'd encourage, we'd challenge, and we'd talk about. We're all new, starting out in different contexts. Ray was church planning as well, and we talked about some of those challenges and how to move forward on them.
Yep.
Sometimes we didn't really have much wisdom as a group, but it was just worthwhile to have someone else who was going to weep with you and pray with you. And other times it was really the opportunity to connect, say, look, here's someone you could talk to about that issue, or, here's a resource to go to. And so it wasn't like we had a lot of wisdom ourselves, but it was a place to start in thinking through those things.
Yep.
So I think that really kept me in full-time ministry at all. It kept me church planning. It probably kept us married in those first 2 years where it really was a pressure cooker.
Yeah, so I was wondering as well. So Kathy obviously found it helpful catching up with Ray's wife Sandy and Steve's wife as well. That was a helpful part, as well as you probably had kids together and shared your struggles and joys there. And also, I guess, is it good to have that group that's outside of your core group so you can complain, laugh, cry, grieve, all those things.
Yeah, all those things and a whole lot more. Yeah, look, I think you definitely need. I think everyone in full-time ministry, particularly in church planning, you need someone who's outside of your church plan, and probably even outside of your immediate, line of command. Not someone in the mother church, that kind of thing. Maybe even not in your denomination.
Yep.
You need someone where you can really be honest about what's working and what are your frustrations. I think it was much tougher for Kathy because all the girls had, all the guys, all of us, we had young families, and just the nature of how things worked, it was harder for the girls to get together. And so I think Kathy felt that loneliness and isolation a whole lot more than I did. And one of the things I'd really do differently if I could get in the time machine and go back would be to really think about that and how to catch up, how to care for her with that.
Yep. But before we move on to Des Moines, you mentioned as well just the one resource that you had, the one book that you got to read. Today you said there's hundreds of books, there's hundreds of methodologies. There's loads of different ways to plan a church, and there seems to be a new book always about, hey, I planted a successful church here. Here's my 5 processes, 3 processes, whatever. Do you think for today's church planter, it's perhaps a little there's a difficulty in trying to work through what is my philosophy of ministry, what is my methodology, and then how do I continue to steer that course when it's now 2015 and there's a new book and this is the way to reach people the best. This is the way to do church best. So the last 2 years have been we need to change. We need to do things differently. Do you think? How do you wrestle with having, I guess, no input and then having too many inputs? Is there a resource? Is there a book that maybe you could recommend? Luke's thrown that question out. Is there a resource or a book that you could recommend? Is there some advice on, I guess, dealing with all that input that is out there now because we've got the web?
Yeah, look, I think that's a really great question. And today, the guys church planning today have completely the opposite issue of there are too many. As you said, Scott, there are too many resources. There's too much material there. You could spend your week reading blogs on the net about church planning and do nothing else. And I sense for a couple of guys, for some guys, that actually is a problem, that they think because there's lots of information out there, they've really got to get on top of a whole lot of it. And I think I think a real danger there is to spend too long thinking about that. I mean, I think there's two kind of guys out there. There's the guy who's not thinking enough about it, and the guys think too much about it, really. But there's a danger in thinking and reading too much, of thinking you've got to read every new book that comes out. And not only will that take all your time, but you'll inevitably the ship will keep lurching from one tack to the other as you think, oh no, the big thing we've got to do is what's this latest book telling me? And I think I see that as well, where guys are changing their vision with every new book that comes out. I'd really I'd really encourage church planners to actually go back to the scriptures and spend time in the pastoral epistles and think about what are the really core principles there. I see some guys, and I'm not knocking any of these things, I see some guys spending so long thinking about cultural engagement and reaching their community and the setup of how they do church, to the neglect of clear teaching of the Bible and working on being preachers who bring the gospel to bear clearly and faithfully into the lives of the people who are turning up, whether they're believers, unbelievers, somewhere in the middle, and preaching clearly and well and teaching the Bible well. I see guys really neglecting their preaching, and I worry about what that means for the kind of churches they'll plant or whether those churches will plant. In the light of that, I hesitate to recommend anything, but I think I would, with a couple of reservations with any book, I think, but I would recommend Centre Church by Tim Keller as a book that actually I think wants to emphasise that the gospel needs to be at the centre of your vision and your teaching and other things. I think the problem with a book like Centre Church is, like a lot of the books, if you look at that and think, wow, here are all the things I have to do in my church plant. You know, we've got to think about mercy ministries. We've got to think about, you know, engagement, cultural engagement. We've got to think about all these things. You can't think about all those things all the time. And I think church planters would be really better off saying, let's focus on doing a couple of things well, because we can't do everything. And in time, you know, you can worry about other things and catch things up. But you can't, when you start, do everything all at once. Yep.
Great. I want to. Did you want to recommend a couple more books or?
Look, I'll start recommending probably. Yeah, it depends on where guys are at and what they're up to. I reckon it's a really old book now, and so that's probably just saying my age, but Miles Shallow wrote a book called 44 Questions for Church Planners, and I'd get the book just for the questions. I think his answers are a generation out of date, but I think he asks some really good questions for church planners, and some of his advice is definitely dated. But if you wanted a book with a solid framework, I reckon it's excellent.
Yep. And I wouldn't send through your questions to Geneva Push as well. So Scott S at genevapush.com. I'm more than happy to recommend books and resources. We've got a lot out there. I want to move on to your time at Drummoyne, because you've now done a house church. You've now planted Blacktown West. So you really should know what you're doing. So the third time you come around to planting, you're not going to make any mistakes. This is going to be the dream run. What did you do different? What did you do the same? Have you worked it all out now that you're at Drummoyne?
Yeah, no, thanks for that. Yeah, thanks, Scott. Yeah, the answer is yeah. No, some of the mistakes I knew I made at Blacktown, I just made all over again, which is really weird. It just shows, sometimes I've got to make a mistake 4 or 5 times before I work it out. I guess for those people who may be outside of Sydney, just to clarify, Blacktown's in the outer west of Sydney. It's a lower socio-economic group. So particularly when we were there, church actually met in the suburb of Doonside, which at the time was the suburb with the lowest socio-economic suburb in Sydney. I think in New South Wales. So it was it was housing commission. Lots of people with financial issues, disabilities, long-term unemployed. And it was great to see the gospel really make a difference in the lives of people in that context. When we moved to Drummoyne, that's much closer to the city. It was an area when we moved 15 years ago in transition from being run-down suburb full of elderly people to being a place where young professionals were moving in droves. So the 15 years we were there, the public school went from about to close to being bigger than it was in the 1950s and demountables everywhere because the area had boomed with people in their 20s, 30s and 40s. But it was certainly much higher socio-economically. And I think the thing that was really important for me to think through was that lots of things that were part of our strategy in a Blacktown context needed to change. And you can't just take what works in a church in one part of a city and think that it's going to work in another part of the city. And I was conscious of that, and we started out quite differently. But I realised that even still, I'd underestimated it, and along the way I discovered it, and I guess continued to learn about how the culture was different, how the context was quite different, and how that really needed to shape how you did church. I mean, one of the things we did very differently from Blacktown was we recruited our launch team, and we really wanted to do that and started church with a launch team out of evangelism. So we didn't bring a team from Blacktown because culturally things were quite different. We arrived, and there was one other couple we knew who lived in the area who said, "If you want to plant a church in the inner west of Sydney, we'll be in it with you." And it was the four of us who met the first time to pray and think about that. And I was quite happy to be slow and patient and connect with people in the area, Christian, non-Christian, start doing evangelism together. And if you didn't want to be in a launch team that was doing evangelism before you got church, then well, I really didn't want you in the launch team. And we did some evangelism. We saw some people converted before we actually even began on a Sunday. We again, and I think it's really important, we took our time with the process of thinking about the culture where we were, of working with the launch team on theological unity and unity on how our mission philosophy. One of the big things was different was the couple of times we surveyed the congregation, the average person in the congregation had 2.2 tertiary degrees, which meant for every plumber in the congregation, we had a couple of them, there was someone who had 3 or 4 degrees. So it was a highly educated congregation. The kind of people we were doing evangelism with were, again, highly educated and were terrified that becoming a Christian was going to mean giving up on their academic credibility, giving up, throwing their brains away to kind of believe something that intelligent, educated people wouldn't believe. And so it really became, in a way that's quite different from Blacktown, part of my preaching needed to be about a certain kind of apologetics about Christianity. It's philosophical and academic coherence. Yep. In that kind of way. So those kind of things were really important. People were readers and wanted to read, and so in moving from a non-book culture in Blacktown, we had a lot of evangelism with simply Christianity, reading through Luke's Gospel, and with people, and they'd eat that up. They'd see all sorts of things. I remember the time I did. It really struck me. I'm in a different place now. I'm ministering in a different context. Reading through Luke's Gospel with a couple. She was an English grad with honours from a university in Melbourne. They read lots. She'd actually written a book that had been in the top, at the time, was in the top 10 bestsellers in the Sydney Morning Herald book list. And I said, look, here's a New Testament. We're going to read through Luke's Gospel together. And she said, oh, does that mean there's an Old Testament? And she was making a joke. And I kind of thought, wow, here's someone who's really well read, reads a lot, is well educated, but is so far from having a familiarity with the Bible, knowing what the Bible's about, that it was it kind of made me realise those two things were part of the context we're in. And that shaped a lot of the way we did ministry quite differently there. and was really important not just to do things the way I knew about them. Now, I could talk more about that, but I guess that's not what our stuff's on.
Yeah, well, I'm very keen to. I mean, one of the landmines or one of the reefs that I think church plants fall into is, in terms of the corporate evangelism, in terms of the church evangelizing, is that once you get that launch date, there's lots of work prior to actually launching and publicly, telling everyone about the church. Once you get to that date, kind of evangelism then trails off. How did you ensure that the DNA that you were doing, that you were personally evangelizing, how did you ensure that you continue to keep that up as church got busier and more complex? How did you also keep that DNA locked in for the life of Drummoyne?
Yeah, okay, that's helpful. I'm not sure we always did that well, and as church got bigger, I found it harder to maintain that culture. But I think the way you start really changes the way you begin, because you don't just, if you have a launch team who really are excited about evangelism and they're committed to personal evangelism themselves, because if you weren't bringing people to a dialogue meeting or doing something evangelistically, sharing the gospel in some context that we could pray about, you really didn't fit in the group. And we actually had a couple of people who dropped off our launch team because they thought, they really wanted to go. They thought, this new church might be a slightly better show than the church I currently go to, and so they came for that reason. So I think if your launch team have that DNA, they will for years to come be key people in your congregation who are infecting others with that. So it's not just up to you, and I think that's really important. I don't think I have anything brilliant to say other than that, just except that we kept talking about that and never assuming it. It was always part of the vision that we talked about. I was always ensuring that I was doing personal evangelism myself, and I would talk about that in preaching, in other contexts at the front. Obviously not sharing lots of personal details of people's lives, but talking about the fact that I was doing that, what I found hard about that. And even the issues of realising how to do it in a different kind of context, and saying, I guess traditionally how churches think about evangelism is like this, but in a context like ours, these things are going to be important. And just taking opportunities like, major events in the news, a tsunami in Japan, to say, how's this going to play out for work on Monday for you? What as a Christian should you say and shouldn't you say, and trying to think ahead on those kinds of issues. Doing it myself, talking about it, keeping it up front were really important. The other thing that I did, which I think was really important from a mistake I made at Blacktown, was I didn't just vet my launch team really, really carefully, but I actually continued to vet people who came for the next 2-3 years extremely closely. I guess the experience at Blacktown was we started out with a launch team where not everyone was on the same page. And look, I was young and out of college and thinking, I don't know whether this is going to work. Anyone who came along, I was just like a puppy dog wagging his tail, happy to see. They were as welcome as anything to be there. And that caused some difficulties for us as people came to us, particularly Christians from other churches, where they'd left with issues. And I always thought, I'd listen to their story of how terrible their last church was and say to myself and say to them, we'll be different, you'll love it here. We're not going to be a church like that. I'm not a minister like that. And welcome them with open arms, to realise that, over time, a lot of the issues they had at the last church, they brought to our church, and they left us to go to other places where the same thing happened again, and the common denominator every time was them. So at Drummoyne, the rhetoric was, it's great for you to visit church here with us. I'm glad you've come today, and your so-and-so's friend has invited you. That's really good. Hang around for a few weeks, and if you want to join us, we'll need to meet up and have coffee and talk about what church is like here and why it's different from other places you might have been.
Yep.
And I met in the first 3 years, I met one-to-one, had that one-off early meeting with everyone who came to personally say, look, we're a church committed to evangelism. We're committed to, here are our values, and we're different from other churches in these ways that you might have been part of, and you really won't work out if you're not really on the board with our values. The other thing I'd ask them if they were a Christian and they'd been in another church, whether they'd moved into the area or whether they'd come already in the area and come from the churches, why they'd left, had they left well. And there were some people where I said, look, I don't think that's a good enough reason to break fellowship at your last church, and you're not welcome here until you go and resolve those issues with the leadership of the church you've been part of. And look, when you say that to people, some people don't come back. Actually, well, what they do is they go back and talk to the leadership there and they resolve things and stay there, and that's a good option. Some of them don't come back, and you find out later on they've gone to a different church again where no one asks them any hard questions and they're happy there. And the really hard one was people who said, oh, thanks for letting me know that, and they just come next Sunday and they keep coming to your public meeting even though you've told them they're not welcome. And we had a couple of people who did that. But we turned away a lot of people. I think that one of the real problems for church plants, especially in a city context, is you will attract all sorts of people who, number one, have big issues and they're leaving the church they're at because they've been passed over for leadership, possibly for good reasons, and they think this new church plant is a place where they can come and get involved in leadership on the ground floor. They bring with them all sorts of particular pastoral issues, or they're just people who think this show might be slightly more exciting than the show I've been part of, and they come with that kind of consumer mentality. We turned away a lot of people in our first couple of years, and we grew quicker. I think, I don't know, but I think all things being equal, we grew quicker because we said no to lots of people. And that was the real thing we did differently. One of the real things we did differently at Blacktown, at Drummoyne compared to Blacktown.
And probably that had a lot to do with you maturing, but also reflecting on your experience. I think one of the key competencies of a church planter is that they're forward thinking. They're always looking forward, which often means that you don't look back and you don't evaluate and you don't reflect. But I think it's helpful to hear you, obviously, as someone who is looking forward and thinking, here's where we want to be, but also is reflecting in the now. So I think a way of avoiding that reef is to regularly sort of take time away yourself to daily, weekly, monthly, and maybe annually to stop, think, reflect on what's happening. Now, I want to keep pressing into a number of other areas. So money is often a great area of conflict. I want you to talk about. I want you to reflect on how you talk about money in the church plant. But before you do that, personally, you've moved from Blacktown, lower socioeconomic area, to Drummoyne. How did you deal with, I guess, the reality confronting you that most people in your congregation are probably earning 2 or 3 times more than you? How did you deal with speaking to your kids about moving from an area where they were probably better, in a family that had more money, and now they're moving to context where they're in a family where they have less money comparatively to the area? How did you just deal with your own? As a husband, I feel it really, really acutely. I want to provide for my family. I want to provide for my family well. How did you deal with that reality? Because my understanding is when you went to Drummoyne, you only worked, you weren't even employed full time. You only employed 2.5 days a week, and you took a job at Bunnings part time just to sort of pay the bills.
That's right. Yeah. So thanks. So we that was exactly as you said. We moved from Blacktown where we were in probably we weren't the top, but we were definitely in the top half of where the congregation was at socioeconomically, and definitely in the maybe the top 15% in the area we lived in. and yeah, moved to Drummoyne, where suddenly I suspect almost everyone earned more money than I did, even if I was when I was full time in ministry. Yeah, when we moved there, we knew we were moving to start something again. We knew we could have brought a team with us from Blacktown. We could have probably drew on people we knew and brought a team with us from different parts of Sydney and have done it full time to start with. But I really wanted that commitment to generate a launch team from evangelism in the context. We started part-time. Yeah, at first it was 2 days a week, and yeah, for a short time I worked at Bunnings. And look, anyone who knows me, I don't know one end of a power tool from another, or how to. I could just about screw in with a screwdriver. That's about it. I'm just not the handyman guy, and so it was hilarious. My friends were so funny. I was doing stock take at Bunnings. I worked there for a short period. Then I got another job working for a parachurch organisation a couple of days a week. And that was a better fit for my skills, and did that while we church planted. But I think I was only at the start, 4 days. I wasn't on we actually took a big drop in pay to go there because I wasn't actually full time even with those 2 part-time things happening.
Pete's got a really helpful question, I think. He asks, what practical things have you done, or did you do then, to reduce financial pressure upon yourself as a church planter? So I assume the overseas holiday was off that year.
Yeah.
What did you do practically to reduce that financial pressure?
Yeah, that's a great question, Pete. Again, anyone who knows me wouldn't come to me for financial advice. But I guess as I think about that, we resisted the temptation to have a second car. We downsized our car. We worked really differently at what we did on days off.
Yep.
So with young kids, you can spend a lot of money doing stuff. We moved into an area where the kid was king, and a professional couple, both working long hours, often with only one child. They're older parents. They've got lots of disposable income, and the way they do parenting is just to spend lots of money on lots of experiences for their kids to have. And we really had to resist that with our kids, and we spent time with them. We did things with them. We went to the park and kicked a ball, and then came home and had peanut butter sandwiches. That was a big thing for us. Yeah, we reined back the holiday. We downsized to one small car, and I think we drove a little less often. We realised very quickly some of our best friends lived at Blacktown, Mount Druitt, and we realised we couldn't afford the petrol to drive and see them on our day off. And so we cut that back from, I think when we started, almost once a fortnight to once a month and then once a 2 months, just for that financial necessity. Look, it's a while ago, but I think they were the key things we did. We needed to talk to our kids about that, because kids are smart. They picked up very quickly that their friends at school were going on ski trips and had all sorts of gadgets and things that they didn't have, and that was a big adjustment for our kids in terms of being an area where they hadn't noticed that kind of thing before because it wasn't actually there.
Yep.
It was, in the end, for us, and both our kids now, they're 20 and 22, they say to us that this was actually an invaluable thing for them. We talked to them about saying, look, because we've followed Jesus and we want to live lives that are useful for him, we do have to have less stuff than other people, at least for the short term. And that's part of doing the really important thing in life of following Jesus. And they were 5 and 7 at the time. And I'm surprised they even remember it, but our conversations about money, and always putting in a gospel framework, not saying, well, look, Dad only works 4 days a week, therefore we can't afford those things, but actually trying to put that in a gospel framework and saying, no, we're choosing to do this because there's something more important. I think it was a really important thing in talking to the kids about, look, less money and all the other costs that come with being ministry kids.
Yep.
I don't know if that answers that question or.
So,
Yep.
So moving to the new era as well. Did you have a fear of speaking about money? Again, you're now older and wiser. You've probably learnt. What did you do differently, just in terms of talking about money generally to your congregation, and to your church planting team? How did you talk about money?
Yeah, look, I think it was something the hard lessons I learned at Blacktown, because I think at Blacktown I went there thinking a lot of these people are really struggling financially. I really can't talk about money, and some of them are quite sensitive about money. It's really interesting that the Doonside area, a really poor area, in the 11 years we were there in that one suburb, there were about 8 different charismatic churches that came and went, that crashed and burned, that all had a health, wealth gospel at the centre of what they wanted to do. And in the area, it was really interesting. People were intrigued and excited by that. But a lot of people we had some contact with had really been burned by that. So all of those things meant I was really sensitive about talking about money. And I look back, I realised over time slowly that it was actually a mistake, that you do need the discipleship, that following Jesus means lordship of every area of your life, including your money, not just how much you give at church, but over your budgeting generally, over being a man who cares for his family and cares for his wife in how he budgets his money overall, but also in even with the small amount you have, being generous with little as an act of faithfulness in the Christian life. So I look back and think that the way I discipled people and the way I built up the congregation at Blacktown had a real hole in it that didn't just mean we got less money in the bucket, but it actually meant that it really, if you start to talk about money and even to say be faithful with a little, you actually create that sense of people that Jesus is Lord of all of this, and I need to really live all of my life for Him, rather than people getting the message that Christianity is a little add-on to the rest of life and nothing else needs to change much for me. So I think it really helps discipleship in every area to make sure you're talking about money in some way. So I worked out over the time at Blacktown I needed to talk about money helpfully and appropriately, and that was I guess helpful when we moved to Drummoyne, where in some ways talking about money was, externally it was easier. People have massive mortgages in the inner west. They'll say to you, we've got less disposable income than we ever had before. But in some ways they definitely still need to be challenged to give money.
Yeah.
One of the things I've thought about with that is we always had a practice of using a box up the back rather than pass the plate around. And look, I think if I church planted again in most contexts in Australia, I would still do that because, look, I go on holidays and the plate comes around and I find it kind of awkward. Think, I've been ambushed here. What do I do? Where's my wallet? I haven't thought much about this. And who gives cash now anyway? So the whole idea of a plate's kind of weird. However, the problem with using the bucket up the back, which I've always done and I want to advocate for, but the problem is you don't really communicate to your regular and your visitor that to follow Jesus will cost you, he'll demand obedience in every area of life. If you go to a church where they pass the plate around and you've never been to church before, the symbol of what they're doing says that straight away. Now, maybe that symbol gets undercut when the person next to you puts in 4 or 5 cent pieces, but I think the symbolism of that's significant. And if we're not going to do that, I think we need to think through, and maybe this is an idea for other people who are more creative than me out there, to think through what are the symbolic ways that we can we can deal with that and talk about that and communicate to our outsider and remind our regular that this is an important part of following Jesus.
Yep.
So I think that's a challenge for us in our current context. It was interesting for me as well, just a little anecdote from when I was a student at Mount Druitt was, at Mount Druitt, lots of people would come to church and say, oh, look, you know, it's really a pain having that bucket up the back because I keep forgetting to give. I bring my money and then go home with it and I don't actually give. And so the leadership there wrestled with it for a while. They're actually very sensitive about asking people for money too much. And they had this system where they gave everyone an envelope when they came to church. In the middle of church somewhere, they said, Rod would say up the front, he'd say, look, I want everyone to get that envelope out, and if you want to give during the next song, put your money in that. If you don't want to give, that's okay. Just seal the envelope up empty, and then we'll collect all the envelopes, and you know, no one will see who's giving and who's not giving, and do that. And they did that, and the first week they did it, my understanding is that the giving tripled. And every week after that, it stayed at that much higher level. And in that context, it was interesting. No one was being forced to give. It was very voluntary. But just helping people, giving people an easy way to give actually made a massive difference to their income. And look, if you're a church planter struggling for money, you know, dreaming about the next staff member you want to put on, tripling your budget just sounds so exciting. But for all the good reasons of discipling people well, I think that it was actually, it's worth us thinking about how we're going about doing that kind of thing.
Yeah, it's good. I think you're right. Talking about money regularly from the front, talking about it with people when they join your church, talking about regularly in your corporate gathering to say that it's costly following Jesus, and also we've got a vision, we've got a mission that that is worth giving to and sacrificing for. I want to move on to family life, and really talk about I guess you as husband, you as father, but also you just working protecting your own spiritual life, your own physical health. Chris asks, can you provide some suggestions, or maybe just talk about what you've done in your life to protect yourself from the dangers of pride and of abusing power, because a lot of church planting leaders are high D people, so dominance is the way they operate, and that that's helpful in getting something started, but it's also can be misused and abused. How did you protect your your relationship with Kathy, and and from the temptations that come from, again, church planners? They're up front lots, they communicate well, they've got lots of strengths, that mean they're perhaps open to temptation, and there's been a number of church planters and church ministers have been brought down by that as well. And then even the physical side of things, just your own health. How do you manage stress, or all those things? And then in the context of a busy family life, it seems like you've got a good relationship with your kids. Now it sounds like you regularly talk to them both through the changes and the life circumstances. But I'm sure you've got a lot to speak about there. So I'll let you sort of answer that question as you see fit.
Yeah, okay. Look, that's a big question, Scott.
It is, yes.
Lots of things there. Yeah.
Maybe tell us about your week. What do you do in your week to, where you hit those things, and then maybe in your month? Yeah.
Yeah. Well, okay. So I've written down, as you asked that question: rest, pride, sex, and family. Look. Look. I think the family thing for me is. I think I learnt the hard way at Blacktown that my family need to be my most important ministry. That to succeed as a church planter and fail as a father who disciples his children is, in the end, I know which one I'd rather have. your kids and your wife are your most important ministry, and to some extent, if you don't minister well to them, you'll have no chance of doing the other well. If you leave the house in the morning and everything's wrong with your wife and you're not getting on, I don't know about other guys, but everything I do that day feels like it's a difficult challenge that overwhelms me and I don't have the strength to cope with. But when things are going well at home, I can walk out the door and face the challenges of ministry, and with a calmness, without a whole lot of with a whole lot of weakness that comes from the fact that the relationships that matter the most to me aren't really working. So in the periods, in the days and the seasons when Kathy and I have really struggled in our marriage, it really impacted just my ability to cope in ministry, to deal with challenges I'd normally just sort of blink once at and tackle and feel like they were too big for me and too hard for me. It would really affect my preaching. I'd feel weak and half-hearted and hypocritical more than I normally do in my preaching. So it makes sense from every angle to see, not for the really important reasons of Jesus is going to ask about in the last day. It's your most important ministry and it matters to God, and you're kidding yourself if you think you can actually church plant well and neglect those things. So you really need to invest time and effort in your family. You can't guarantee what happens with your kids. You can't guarantee what will happen in your marriage, but you just need to be a faithful steward with what you've got. We really hit the wall with that in our first couple of years in Blacktown. I kept on thinking that the more hours I put in, the more likely the church is to start and the church is to grow, which I think is a huge mistake. And when I actually stepped back and spent more time with my family, more time in prayer, and rested more, church actually did better, which I think was God's. I think there are a couple of reasons for that. One was just God teaching me that it's a lot of it's about being in the right place at the right time and God actually giving you the growth. It's not about how much effort you put in, but I think actually I did better as a leader by actually spending less time in church leadership and more time making sure I was a leader in my family. So that really changed for us in the different seasons of life. When my kids were little, it was really important to have that day off and have a day off on a Saturday with our kids when they were at school. Well, it's really important, and that took me ages to sort of, have the sermon ready by the end of Friday so I could have Saturday off and not be preoccupied. I'm not good at doing that, and it took a lot of adjustment, but that was really important, a really important part of what I was doing with my family. As they got older, one of the downsides of ministry is you're often a shift worker. You're often out at nights. You're often tied up on a Sunday when other families might still be at church but have less on than you, and they might not be quite as exhausted at the end of church as you are. There's lots of downsides about ministry and families. One of the upsides we worked out fairly early on, my accident more the design, is that you actually have more flexible time during the day. And so sometimes I could go up to school and spend some time being one of the readers in the remedial reading class at my kids' school. I could go up and see them at presentations and sport things at school. Sometimes I was the only dad there on some occasions. But that was a real privilege to be able to do that. So there are swings and roundabouts that's important for you to work, even if there are some costs with your kids when they're little. As our kids have got older, having the day off with them is less important because they've got their own ideas about what they want to do with their day off. And it's more about being being around and being available at different times when they want to talk, and really investing time in them at the time that's going to work for them, not necessarily the time that's going to work for you. I'll move on to talk about other things.
Yeah, that'd be good. Yeah. What about the importance of holidays, rest?
Look, again, I think our first couple of years at Blacktown, where we really went close to not just cashing it in on the church plant, but cashing on ministry altogether, was all about me not managing rest well at that time, and putting in too many hours, thinking that more hours equals more successful ministry. Yeah, and as I said earlier, really, I learned through that I needed to rest more, and I needed to talk to my congregation about the fact that I needed rest. So I would say to them, look, if I don't get my day off, I will be more cranky with you. I will be more, I'll be less creative. I'll be more negative about your good ideas. Your life will be a misery if I don't get my day off. And sometimes I would need to explain it to the person who really felt like they had to meet with me this day, and see that as a constant educative process with my congregation. But I think I was always, when I talked to other people about that, preaching it to myself and reminding myself about it, and the importance of rest. So we, day off when our kids were little, really focused around our kids. As they got older, it was different. But Kathy and I also, Kathy works part-time, has always been busy with things. But at Des Moines, we realised we needed to set good patterns for making sure we had time together that wasn't just with the kids. So we said, we're going to do Friday lunch together every week. And I actually said, we're going to do it at the same restaurant every week, so we don't spend 15 minutes arguing about where we're going to go today. We're going to go there, we're going to have lunch, we're going to talk about how the week's been, how we're going, and have that time. And I think with about half a dozen exceptions, apart from when we were on holidays or I was away from home, we did that every Friday for 15 years. And that was, it sounds simple and almost trivial, but it was really, really important for us. Now, the main threat to that lunch not happening, well, it was partly my what's going to happen is about 12:25 before I'm due to sort of walk out the door with Kathy at 12:30 and go across the road to the restaurant. Someone's going to ring with a major crisis. Some email's going to arrive that drops the bottom out of everything on Sunday. It always seems to happen at that time on Friday, and I have to work really hard to say there is virtually nothing, barring an earthquake, there is virtually nothing that is so important that I can't wait for this hour to happen. I had texts to say that people were in hospital, all sorts of things. But as soon as lunch was over, I raced to go to do. But there's very little that can't wait now. So we really worked hard doing that. The other thing that really worked against us doing that was it wasn't always fun. Because often Kathy she'd save up all the things that were annoying her and all the dumb things that I'd said and her frustrations, because she knew she was going to get me for an hour at that lunchtime. And so there were certainly periods where I thought to myself, why am I doing this? Because it's just an hour where I get beaten over the head. And but it was actually really important because Kathy there needed to be an hour where she could do that because of all the dumb things I was doing. And for me to hear those things and understand them and start to apologise for them. And so I'm not saying that, don't think of it as a romantic, warm and fuzzy hour, but you need to actually have that time to connect and talk about what's not working as much as what is working.
So are there other things that you put in place? You spoke about catching up with friends to talk about preaching, but did that also become an accountability group where you had someone asking you the hard questions about about your thought life, about things that you're viewing. You know, are you a covenant eyes person? Yeah. What are the other accountability structures that you had in place?
Yeah, sure. No, that's helpful. Look, I have mixed feelings about accountability. In the end, your accountability group is only as good as your truthfulness.
Yep.
And if you actually talk with guys who are in accountability groups who are honest with you, most of them admit that they actually lie in their accountability groups. They say they're reading the Bible more than they are. They say various things. And an accountability group is only as good as you want it to be. And I think people think, oh, I'll have this group who will make me accountable. And there can be a real self-deception with that. And a lot of guys I know who've gone off the rails have had some kind of formal accountability, but they've not actually made use of it. So I would say the most important thing you've got to do is work out that these things matter. To work out that sin in your life and the temptations that you're playing around with and cultivating and letting take root are actually going to do you and those around you great damage. It's going to stuff your relationship with God, your relationship with all the people in your life. It's going to stuff you. And if you don't keep preaching that to yourself and being in a group with guys where you remind each other of that, formal accountability is a big mistake. So by all means get covenant eyes on your computer, because it will make it that bit more difficult for you to look at pornography. But if you really want to look at pornography, you'll find a way to do it. What you need to keep dealing with is not just your circumstances, but your heart, and keep preaching that to yourself and reminding yourself of that. So I found the peer group I had with Ray and Steve in those 11 years really helpful for that. In the time at Des Moines, I tried a number of things that actually backfired. I tried to start the same kind of group with 2 other guys in our area, and look, for one reason or another, I think I was trying to create something that had chemistry with a particular set of personalities, and it didn't work in the next context with some different guys. I tried to do that a couple of times, it didn't work. What I've settled on is having 2 or 3 guys who I catch up with regularly, and we talk about how we're going. We confess sins, we pray for each other, and we do that. I wouldn't call it an accountability group. I think it's actually friendship, and friendship is the great antidote for the isolation that often leads to guys stuffing up with sin and really flaming out. It's a friendship where you know someone's committed to you, rather than a formal accountability thing. If I can make it, might be seen as slim distinctions. I think that's really important.
Great. Well, Craig, really appreciated your honesty this morning. I feel like we could probably talk for another hour about all your mistakes and the things that you learned from them. It's been really helpful. I just wanted to draw people's attention to a number of resources that are out there, and we'll make attention to those as we send out. A couple of great books that are helpful, just to, I guess, and again, raising questions and helping you think through some of the solutions. 10 most common mistakes made by new church starts. Jim Griffith and Bill Easom. One of the 2 chapters that I like to send out to planters are the premature launch, so launching too quickly. I encourage you to, as Craig said this morning, work hard at mission and evangelism, and don't be so quick to publicly launch. And then evangelism ceasing after launch. So just thinking, how do we keep mission on the agenda? How do we keep that momentum building? Yeah. The next book is a book by a guy called Tom Niebel, and it's called Church Planting Landmines. Again, some helpful things just to dip into and to think about. We didn't get a chance to talk about leadership development, but that's something that is one to be thinking about. From the start, how do I develop leaders, knowing that I'm going to have a church that grows and is going to need leadership. The final resource is is a paper that we'll make available as well. That was produced a few years ago by Ed Stetzer, and he looks at seven areas where church planners often struggle. So, we've touched on many of those today. I thought it'd be good to finish off praying for church leaders and asking God to be at work. So I might do that, and then I'll hand it over to Ben, who'll finish the webinar off for us. So let's pray. Heavenly Father, Thanks so much for your love and your goodness. Thanks for just the opportunity we've had this morning to reflect on our own personal walks with you, for the chance to hear, honestly, about Craig and Kathy's experience church planning. We pray that the fruit of our discussion this morning, might be a desire to turn to you in repentance and faith, a desire to trust you more, and to walk humbly as we kick off churches. I want to pray for church planners across Australia and across the world. I want to pray for their wives and ask Heavenly Father that you might sustain their marriages, keep them strong, help them to be reflective and asking the hard questions. And we pray for honesty. That people might not be isolated, but they might be joyfully starting churches that are evangelized into existence and reach many of the lost with the great news of Jesus. We pray that for your sake and for your glory. Amen.
Amen.
Thanks, Craig.
Amen. Thank you very much, Scott. And to Craig, we've gone a little bit overtime this morning, everyone, because Craig's had so much to share with us, so many great honest reflections, theological reflections, and practical experience and wisdom to give us about church planting reefs and how to go about avoiding them. We're going to be sending you out a link in about the next day or so to let you know about the on-demand status of today's webinar. There was so much material in today. We know you're going to want to go over it again. And also feel free to share it on with your friends. So you'll get that email in the next 24 hours or so. Also want to point you to the next webinar that's coming up. It's coming up on the 4th of March at 9:30 a.m. And it is big events that actually build churches. Repeat, big events that actually build churches. We know you want to hear more about this. We're going to have Toby Neal with us from Vine Church in Sydney, telling us about exactly what this means, that there are events that will actually assist you in building churches. And before we finish up this morning, I'd like again to thank our sponsors. Firstly, EA Insurance, who continue to put their support behind the planter sessions. EA helps out hundreds of Christian and community not-for-profits with their insurance needs. So, as we mentioned at the start, we're mentioning it again, if you have insurance questions for your church plant, Geneva highly recommends you get in touch with EA. Go to ea.org.au. And of course, everyone over at Christian Super, who are helping out more than 6,000 churches, schools, Christian-owned businesses, and not-for-profits with their superannuation needs. If you have super-related questions for yourself or your church plant, we recommend you get in contact with Christian Super. So go to christiansuper.com.au. So on behalf of Craig and Scott, our host today, as well as all the team at Geneva Push, we really hope you've enjoyed today's presentation. My name is Ben McKecken, that's what my name is, and we hope you have a fantastic day. Thanks for joining us. We look forward to your company again at the next webinar.